All right, chapter 4, we get into samples and experiments, and this really could be the opening chapter for statistics, because this is how we're going to go about collecting our data. And then once we have our data, now we can start looking at plots of it, numeric analysis of it, and things like that. So this really could go first in this in any stats course. So a couple things. One, we're going to talk about populations and samples. Now there's a big difference. Population is going to be your big group, okay? The group that we want to find something out about. So like U.S. residents, that would be a population. The students in a stats class, that could be a population. Not as large, but it's still the big group. Okay, now what a sample is, it's a part of your population. Okay, and so yeah, it's easy enough for us to go in and find out something about a stats class. I could find the class average, things like that, but it's hard for me to find out, say, the median income for U.S. residents. And so that's why we could take a sample, we could take a part of that population and then make some estimates from the values I get out of that sample. Okay. Now there's some different ways that we can collect data. Okay. We could go in and do surveys and things like that, and they all kind of fall under different situations. So one of them is a voluntary response sample, and it's just like it says, it's voluntary. You don't have to fill it out. I often tie this in with voting for homecoming king and queen. Some people choose not to vote. Okay, it's a volunteer. Okay, pop-up surveys on the internet. Okay, don't have to do them. Second type is what we call a convenience, okay, because it's convenient, it's easy. Okay, so I'm just going to hand out a survey to my class. That's easy for me. Okay. I'm just going to talk to the first 10 people that walk into school one day. So it's convenience. Okay, and the problem is sometimes you don't get data that's actually representative of the whole populations when you use the convenience sample. Stratified and cluster are very similar because both of them, what you're going to do is break them into groups. Okay, how they differ. With stratified, we break them into groups first. Okay, for example, we think there's some similarities in these groups, so maybe we talk about 9th graders, 10th graders, 11th graders, and 12th graders. Okay. And then what we do is we take a random sample, and we'll talk about that a little more in a second. Random sample from each. Okay, so I'm going to take a random sample of 9th graders, 10th graders, and 11th graders, and 12th graders. Okay, so that's what we do when we have a stratified random sample. Group them up. So maybe we should go back here quick. SRS. Okay, what that is, it's called a simple random sample. And what we're doing in a simple random sample is we're giving everybody the same opportunity to being chosen. Okay, so in my population, say there's 30 kids in my stats class, and I'm going to choose 5. I'm going to give everybody the same chance of being chosen. So it's like putting names in a hat. And then picking out 5 names. All right, so back to cluster. Okay, cluster, we're also going to group it. Okay, difference is we're going to have our groups. Okay, but then what we do is we randomly choose a group or groups. And then everyone in the group is part of the sample. Okay, so what we could do is talk about homerooms, advisories. Okay, there's my group. So I'm going to randomly choose 5 of them, and everybody in that advisory will take part in my survey. All right, and then we get bias. Okay, like I said, some of these surveys or these sampling methods can cause what's bias. It favors certain outcomes. Okay, so say I go back to that convenience sample idea where I talk to the first 10 kids that come to school. Okay, what time do you go to bed at night? Okay, there's going to be bias because they probably get to bed earlier so that they can get up first and get up earlier and get to school first. Okay, so there's bias sometimes. And one of the things you always want to talk about if you do believe there's bias is also what direction is it pulling it. Okay, so do you think the value that we got, say for a mean for my sample, is too large or too small? Okay, so you got to talk about bias and which direction it gets pulled. All right, now we do have some other ways that we can create bias when there are types of errors. We have what's called sampling errors and non-sampling errors. Okay, so sampling errors come from the act of actually choosing my sample. Okay, so that would include, the idea of the types of samples that we take, convenience sample, voluntary response sample. Okay, that's how I'm choosing my sample, and because there's certain people not being involved, that's going to create bias. Another situation is under coverage. Okay, people are part of the population, but not possible to be in the sample. Okay, so for instance, maybe I'm going to do a phone survey and I may set it up with a random digit dialer. Okay, so any possible number would be called, but if somebody doesn't have a phone, they can't be part of my sample, even though they might be part of the population. Okay, so sampling errors, it's involved in how I'm choosing to get my sample. Okay, non-sampling errors is, okay, now I've chosen my sample already. Okay, but now there's going to be problems with the way people respond, okay, or they don't respond. Okay, so again, maybe an insurance company sends a letter out, a survey to their clients, they ask them to fill it in, we don't send it back. Okay, response bias, that's when people tell lies. Okay, moral and ethical situations, sex, drugs, alcohol, things like that, people will lie one way or the other sometimes. And then wording of questions. We can word questions to elicit certain responses. I can make it sound like, a common example is they'll talk about the mayor and how he's done some bad things. Should he be kicked out of office? Okay, wording it saying how he's a bad person, now that's going to elicit more people to say, yeah, he should be. If I would just come in and say, should the mayor be kicked out of office? Okay, that might be a better way to say it. All right, so that wraps up 4.1.